know it.
It's very interesting to think about. Okay, so we see all these things all across the world. And so we always think aliens or whatever because the same people built all these things. That's why we think aliens. People back in the day couldn't travel the world. So how did they do things all over the world? And then we think, oh, we don't know the human brain. Maybe these people did come to their own conclusions in different places. Maybe these people thought of something and they were like, oh, math. And then these people thought of something and they're like, oh, math and science. And maybe it was just a biology thing that we all kind of thought about and it popped up in different places. And so we don't know for sure. Right. So we don't know if one person influenced all these building things, but it's funny because you look at all of them and you kind of think, the coincidences start becoming too many. You start thinking that, okay, it has to be the same people. You start thinking that, okay, no, they're leaving a mark or they're doing something because it's not only the three, the past, future, present doorways, but then it's the meter being everywhere, that form of measurement, okay, being consistent everywhere, and then it's like the building techniques being consistent everywhere. Oh, the levitation or the big mystery is everywhere. Oh, and then the polygonal masonry. Oh, that's also the same sign that's in these places everywhere. Oh, and then they're always aligned to the constellation. Oh, well, that's also another signature that's in these things that are everywhere. It's almost like whoever made all of these things put all of these things in there. Oh, this site? Oh, it's aligned to the stars. It's made out of this. It's magically done. It's back in the day. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's aligned, it's this, it has polygonal masonry, it has that. So all of them have all of the things, it seems like. And so that's why we're starting to think, and everybody's slowly coming to the conclusion, oh, it has to be the same people. The same people had to have been all over the world. And so, okay, what's the theory now? The same people have been all over the world. And so, okay. And so, if you don't believe in aliens or whatever, and it's funny, some people don't want to believe in aliens, but they just don't know how else to explain it. They see the evidence, and they don't know how else it would be possible other than aliens. And so, okay, it's possible if another civilization traveled the world 12,000 years ago. That's all that has to happen. They have to have technology enough to just be able to travel the world.
Different types of civilization can coexist on the same planet shouldn't be surprising to us because we do it. And that's what I'm suggesting was the case back then. But a civilization very different from our own. They certainly had enough technology to explore the Earth, enough technology to map the Earth, highly advanced astronomical knowledge that should not have been possessed by hunter-gatherer civilizations. Knowledge of obscure astronomical phenomena such as the precession of the equinoxes, such as the obliquity of the ecliptic, could only have been accumulated through thousands of years of careful observation.
But yeah, like I said, some people don't want to believe in aliens or whatever. They just are forced to because they look at this and they have no other way to explain it. But I, with this, am explaining it in a way that makes sense. It not only makes sense, it makes like a lot of sense. And so what happened was the Egyptians, they got technologically advanced because of their mathematical system that they discovered or invented.
This all existed thousands of years before the academics said that civilizations did. And the academics will say, oh, well, the hunter-gatherers made it. How did they have the time? If you are a hunter-gatherer, all of your time has to go on catching your dinner and making your family. This temple was made by organized people, incredibly skilled people that would have to spend time away from hunter-gathering and spend a lifetime learning constellations and learning about ley lines and learning how to carve a correct cheetah. The whole thing just screams that we've got something wrong in the timeline. I feel like we're missing something and we're not keeping our minds open. I went to Saqqara, going into the Serapeum. Again, there are big questions in the world that need to be answered. The fact that every single ancient civilization all have very similar origin stories and not one of them claims to have invented anything. Not one civilization take any claim for inventing maths, agriculture, inventing civilization. None of them say, oh yeah, that was us. All of them say that they were taught it by someone else. And we don't think anything of that.
So this is why it all starts to unravel. And this is where it all starts to make sense. Because that's the very first question and the very first seed of everything. Is if people were hunter-gatherers, how did they ever find the free time to learn anything? And so that's where it all comes back to Egypt, and the Heliacal rising of Sirius, and the floods of the Nile, and it all starts to come together. Because, okay, they were hunter-gatherers that were successful, that were able to, have farms and have some sort of system, right? But then they had floods of the Nile, and then so they start realizing, with the stars, that they could actually predict when that would happen because of the year and the seasons and watching the stars. And so they started to keep track of those things because of that. Oh, this flood comes in every year and ruins our shit. And they start to catch on to that, okay, every now and again, this flood comes in and ruins all our shit, but then it goes away. And then they find out how to keep track of that. Okay? And that's the beginning of mathematics. That's the beginning of watching the stars. That's the beginning of everything. Because they start paying attention to that. They start paying attention to what numbers are. Oh, the fingers. And they have their little plots of land that always get ruined and everything, so they start measuring them out. And they start making actual parameters of, okay, this is where my land is. So when things get flooded and ruined, and then when the water goes away, we're going to know where my land is because of this marker that we're going to make. Okay? But then so they start measuring things. And it all gets so deep so quick. But so when the Nile flooded, they had, I think, 2 months of vacation. All of their fields were flooded. They couldn't work. They couldn't do anything. They had to go to dry land. They had to take their stocks of everything that they could gather, and they had to just go survive for 2 months until the water went away. And then they'd come back and they'd rebuild and start their stuff again. And so, word on the street is that during those 2 months of vacation or downtime, they would just think and study and try things and learn things and experiment with their new findings about math and the stars, and they would watch the stars, and they would start counting things, they'd start keeping track of things, they'd start measuring things, they'd start doing things, and oh my god, and then all of a sudden they realized how to make concrete and glass, and they'd start making all these crazy things, and then they realized, concrete changed everything for them, and then they realized that they could harness the sun. So that's the next step, is with using a magnifying glass to harness the sun, they can melt, transfer, shape, manipulate any stone material. They melt it with the sun, they capture it, you know what I mean? Because they have molten frickin' stones. But also, not only that, their solar power, the magnifying glass, sped up the concrete drying process. So some of these things that are like built in ungodly timing, like they wrote on this thing that this palace was made in blah 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 time, but that doesn't make any sense. Some of them, it's even like, okay, even if it was made of concrete, that doesn't make any sense. It's still too fast. And so, okay, I'm starting to think that they were, using the sun as a catalyst to speed up the concrete process. Because imagine if you could make these stone temples, but we gotta wait for all the concrete to dry. No, you don't. If you're making the pyramid brick by brick, and you have to wait for the concrete to dry, that might be a little, nuts and time consuming. But if you can literally just be like, pour the stuff, dry it, like pretty much instantly. Yeah. So that's what's cool about this whole thing, is I think where civilization took off is instant concrete. We think we have instant concrete today, but we don't harness the sun to dry it instantly. I think they went nuts with the whole concrete and the sun and everything. But no, okay, so yeah. And then I think that when the Nile flooded, they decided to leave for those 2 months. They decided, because it's obvious that they had boats and stuff like that. There's hieroglyphics everywhere of proof that they had boats and they traveled and they did all sorts of stuff. And maybe when they were traveling the world, they, used the sun to protect themselves. You know what I mean? A civilization's like, oh my god, there's people coming in boats from the horizon. We should attack them. And they just have a solar ray that comes down, just boop. And they're just like, nope, we'll level you down with like this laser beam if you guys try to stop us. Because we're here to share knowledge, and we're here to teach you things, and you're going to be nice about it. Because we're here to tell you about the concrete and the sun drying process and the whole thing. And you're going to listen to us, god dang it. Because if not, we're going to laser you down. I think that, because that's, sometimes I think about, if they went to these cultures to try to teach them things, like, how come those cultures didn't just kill and eat them or attack them or anything? It's like, because, some of them might have tried. But it's like, if you just have this thing on your hat, or if you just have somebody carrying one, or like maybe it was one of those poles, just boop, capture the sunlight and melt people. So all of a sudden people are listening to what you have to say. But yeah, like I said before, is they didn't even have to speak the language. They could just show them, this is how you do it. They form it, they use the sun, and they walk off. I'm going to blow the lid off this whole thing pretty instantly, pretty quickly. It's funny because I'm going to answer this one question with this example, and it's actually going to just all of a sudden show that my theory is absolutely not f***ing around. This one example of this thing is like gonna single-handedly be one piece that's just like makes this whole theory come into like rationality, and it's gonna be a mind-blowing revelation, and it's gonna be just the beginning. So this theory, I genuinely believe that if anybody tries to say anything about it, it's just because they're a hater, it's just because they like to argue, or they have some agenda, or they're a Freemason and they're still trying to keep it a secret. Those are the options. In this first tunnel example, it's gonna totally give credibility to this whole thing, and it's gonna give an answer to something that nobody has an answer for. It's actually like physical, literal evidence. It's actually literal proof. For anybody that has like a brain.
The Barabar caves in India, I saw a documentary on it. They have LiDAR scanned the inside of these stone caves built into the rock face. The precision and the measurements and the smoothness, it is precise to like within 0.01 of a millimeter. Basically, it's almost impossible for the human eye and the human hand to make that kind of surface, to make that kind of precision into stone. If people could only historically have been using hand tools, their eyes and their hand tools, how did they get it so smooth? How did they get it so precise? It's like another level of genius. How would you even see to do that inside a cave with all of the dust and everything? And how do you even breathe inside such a small space? How do you get the light in there? How do you even see what you're doing? So there's this huge mind problem. Just physically, how did they do it? And also, what's the purpose of them? Because if they were for like storing things, like why would you need the precision? There's many cave systems all over the world where they're just like rough cut, like it didn't matter.
So if you ask me, this whole cave thing is like a smoking gun, or like just straight up evidence. It's just straight up like kind of just proof to me in a way. Because, okay, so these caves, right? So this cave mystery that she's talking about, oh, how did they see? And how did they breathe? And, you know, there's all these problems. And it's funny because that reminds me of a problem that they had in the tunnels under the pyramid. They have the same problem. They said they don't know how they carved these tunnels, and they don't know how they made them so precise, how they were able to breathe, how they were able to see. It's the same mystery in Egypt and in India.
80-meter long tunnel that descends to a depth of 80 meters into the rock, which is 1.1 meters wide by 1 meter high, with an error of only 1 centimeter from beginning to end. Here is a tunnel of our time. At first glance, they are ordinary tunnels. The entrance is 79 centimeters high and ends 16 meters further with a difference of only 5 centimeters. It's 75 centimeters wide at one end and 76 centimeters at the other end, a difference of 1 centimeter. An almost perfectly straight line. How does one build this tunnel with such precision underground? The biggest problem is indeed the CO2. When a worker works, he exhales CO2. This CO2 accumulates at the bottom. If this CO2 is not removed, it remains there for several weeks. It is assured death if he does not go out at once. Suppose they solved, one doesn't know how, the problem of light, the tool to measure precisely, and the hard tool for digging, that they have found the way to evacuate the CO2. The problem remains that it is technically impossible to dig towards the bottom. It would take an arm 2 meters long to reach the bottom. There is no explanation.
And so, okay, interesting. So if we're going with the theory that these are the same people, and that they were the Egyptians, okay, so the Egyptians have polygonal masonry on the Sphinx. To me, it kind of says that that's evidence that's like kind of where it originated or whatever. So that's kind of evidence also in a way of the Egyptians being the ones that are traveling the world and doing all these things. And it's interesting to think about people don't know how they made the underground caves. Like the pyramids are a mystery, yes, of course, but also the underground caves are a bigger mystery. They say people don't know how that's possible. And so that's what we're looking at, is the possibility of things. Because you'll notice a trend in this video that people keep saying, it seems almost impossible. And you see, they want to say it's impossible, except for they see it, so they always add the word almost. It's almost impossible. They don't know how it is possible, but they see it. And so, okay, that's a miscommunication we gotta clear up. Certain things are impossible. Just because you see it doesn't mean that the impossible is possible. It means that there's an illusion. It means there's a different answer. And so certain things like this underground tunnel and this aren't possible. So what is the other explanation? Oh, if it wasn't carved underground, Or, oh, if it wasn't just a piece of granite that was hollowed out into a cave, then what's the answer? And so they both have the same answer. And so when you realize that, and then you realize that this doorway that she just pointed out is all over the world, and it's in Egypt, and oh, it's also in this little cave system. It's interesting to think that, there's those similarities all over the world, and that the explanation satisfies both things, and it makes so much sense that it was, so... It's funny how it explains all those things away. It makes it so, okay, they didn't need light. They didn't have to be in there to breathe. They didn't have this. They didn't have that. That's how it was all precise. Because, you see, it explains the precision of the underground tunnels, too. Because when they're like, the tunnels under the pyramid are too precise. They go all the way into the ground, and they're a perfect square, and they're precise. That's not possible. Okay, well, this method that explains this and this explains how that's possible, and exactly how that happened. Like, if it's not the way that it happened, then I don't know. You know what I mean? It's too weird that it goes from being impossible to where they're like, no, it was done this way. This is the consequence of that because it was done this way, and that's how it ended up. That's how it was perfect. They didn't have to make it perfect. They just did this, and and then it was perfect. And then it's just like, it makes so much sense that it's, you know what I mean? But okay, so the tunnel is a smoking gun because the Barbar caves and the caves underneath the pyramid have the same mystery and they have the same explanation.
There is no explanation. The workers have already measured and set up the mold at the bottom of the bowl, which will create the South Underground Tunnel. The concrete just has to flow around it. They will use the same principle for the underground chamber. The mold has been put in place and the concrete was poured around and over it. Workers took less care for the walls of the underground chamber than for the top of the pyramid. This concrete contains much less water than that of the upper part of the pyramid. When the mold is removed quickly and it has not had time to dry, it gives this rough appearance. The Egyptians never dug underground chambers or corridors below the pyramids since it's impossible. They simply filled it in. The workers did not suffer. They worked in the open air and in good conditions. The cavity was then filled with limestone concrete. This explains the high precision of the South Underground Tunnel, the service tunnel, but also the sharp edges of the tunnel in this photo of Edgar Wise in 1910. A clay mold is prepared on site. The layout is made precisely to the millimeter on the outside. Once the mold is completed, they pour the granite in lava form with the solar lenses arranged above. The granite cools and hardens. The clay is removed, and the result is amazing. Perfect corners and super polished surfaces. The Egyptians left their unique imprint here, the meter. The hemisphere of the Vania cave measures 3 meters and 5 centimeters.
So the ancient Egyptians' civilization made it to like over 3,000 years, right? To put that in some sort of perspective, we're in year 2023. If we lived to year 3023, we assume that our civilization would be super advanced. Because if we think about, oh, it's 2023. When I was born in 1993, everything was totally different. Throughout my life, as I've grown up, I've watched the world grow up and get technologically advanced. And so I've often thought that it's interesting that just in my lifetime, things can become crazy. They can go from low tech to high tech just in 25, 30 years, And so a lot can happen in 20 years. And we often think that if we were ever to make it to year 3000 in anything, we'd be super lucky. And if we ever did make it that far, we'd probably be like Interstellar, or we'd be doing something. We're probably not going to make it to year 3000, but that'd be insane, right? And so it's weird to think that they made it to year 3000 something. We don't think of it like that because it's BC and AD and all that, but their civilization was around for over 3,000 years, and so it's really interesting to think about that. And if they didn't discover electricity or stuff to make computer chips, so let's say that they didn't become technologically advanced like that, they did become technologically advanced in other ways. Probably just went on a different trajectory of technology. And so, but that's why this concrete thing and this geopolymer and all this makes sense to me. This guy said that the answer is in chemistry, and it's on the ground, not looking up into the sky for answers at gods or aliens, but the answer was, look down at the ground, and the answer's in chemistry. So if they made it to year 3000, but they didn't come across electricity and all that stuff, I mean, that's debatable. They might have. I mean, I really don't know. I kind of think that they might have, but I don't think that these things were made with power tools. I really don't think that anymore. I thought that like a month ago or whatever, and ever since I found this theory, I really don't think that anymore. But yeah, just to think that, they had a lot of time to get really advanced. And we often think they obviously had crazy technology because we see their products in front of us, so we don't even know what the process was or how they made it, but we see the finished product, and it's crazy. It's like perfection and insane and mind-blowing and impossible.
If we look upon the statues of ancient Egypt, for example, the symmetry, along with the proportional precision present within their statues, is not only perfection personified, but unquestionably far too advanced for the so-called academically claimed builders to have achieved. But also the often accompanying curious stone cuts, scars, and striations, all clearly left by high-speed disc-cutting machine, a signature tool mark, identical to that which is left by modern-day power tools, along with the still absent demonstration of the methods used to construct the pyramids.
And so, yeah, it's interesting to think that, maybe they got really good at chemistry. Maybe they got really good at math and architecture and all these things that, what little they had that they did focus on and try to evolve. Like, if all they had to mess with was concrete, for 2,000 years, then yeah, they probably perfected that building method. They probably perfected that paste, different methods, different ways of using the sun, different, I think that they just perfected what they knew, and they got really good at those things. And something that actually has my back on thinking that they just got good at chemistry, and they got advanced down that path. So what's sort of proof of that? This Terra Praetor? Oh, back in the day, people made their own soil, and we didn't even know how.
They invented a soil, and that soil has a name. It's called Terra Praetor. Archaeologists refer to it as Amazonian dark earths or Amazonian black earth. It's a man-made soil. It's thousands of years old. It's full of microbes that are not found in adjoining soil. It's based around biochar. And you can take a handful of 8,000-year-old Terra Praetor and you can add it to barren soil, and that soil will instantly become fertile.
Like, they were somehow able to make this weird fertile soil in the Amazon. It's called Amazonian black earths. Okay, so that's proof that they're doing something with chemistry that we don't know, because they came up with a... So yeah, that's kind of what my theory is running with and pointing at, is that, yeah, they just focused on chemistry and the molecular world and making things and combining things and mixing things. That's how they were able to make the Amazonian dark earths. So maybe they didn't have spaceships, and maybe they didn't, have lasers and levitation and sound technology. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I'll show you some things on here. There might have been options for sound things. But I really don't think they utilized that too much, if they did at all. Because, yeah, another thing that makes me think that they just got really good at chemistry stuff is the musical stones in India. Oh, there's these stones that are musical and we don't know how. Oh, like stairs. They have a staircase that you roll a rock down and it goes like boo-dee-doo-doo-doo. It's not like it doesn't sound like, like a xylophone or anything, but you can tell that their music, and like that staircase is like sectioned off. People aren't even allowed to touch it because they don't know how they did that with those stairs. And then there's, in Indian temples, every now and again you'll find a brick that's just like, and then Shiva's bell, this big rock that's in the mountain of somewhere by India, that was around 10,000 years old. That's just a rock that's like a bell. But you want to know what's hilarious about that is it looks just like a rock, and they're like, oh, we don't know how this happened. I guess it's a god thing. Shiva, God just came down and blessed this rock, and now it rings like this.
So this is the musical instrument of Shiva, and it's 10,000 years old. And you may say, we did not have metals 10,000 years ago. Well, they did not use metals to create this instrument. We don't know how this was created or if it's a natural formation. You don't need a metal to strike this. I can simply use another stone .
guess what? I'm willing to bet that I don't think that that's a rock. All these things look like rocks. All these temples, all these rocks, all these this, all these monoliths, all these this. They all look like rocks, but I'm starting to think they're not. You know, and this is the smoking gun, the Shiva's bell. It's like, oh, that looks just like a rock, but it's a bell. So that's proof that they can make things that look just like rocks. And then they can make it a bell if they want to. They can change the composition of it so much that it sounds like a bell, but it looks just like a rock. Okay, so they're able to just make rocks. And we can't tell the difference of what is a real one. Okay, so that's proof right there. That they're good at chemistry and mixing and making stones and stuff. But something that's interesting, though, is, okay, so I feel like we could test my theory, because I feel like I know how to make these musical stones, the musical stairs, Shiva's bell. All these say, oh, how did they make this? It looks just like a rock or a concrete structure, but you knock on it and it rings. So they obviously made this. And it's funny because then you go back to the rock melting technology and the myths about that. Okay, so I guess I'll take a shot at this if anybody can try to do this. So, Shiva's bell. Oh, that's 10,000 years old. We don't know how they made that. Oh, and it looks just like a rock. So I bet you anything that, let's say it's not a concrete thing. Let's say, oh no, we've tried to make concrete ring like a bell. And we've put in all sorts of things. We've put metal in it that rings like a bell. We've put that in concrete trying to replicate this. And that's not the answer. It's not that simple. So aliens, the rock melting technology, and the stuff that's sort of proof that it is real. So I think that they took the rock, like Shiva's bell was a kind of rock, right? And they're like, hey, let's make this rock into the bell, right? Maybe they try to keep it the same shape and size, maybe not. But they're like, this is the rock that we're going to use, and this just going to look like this rock. So they melt it down, they put it in magma form, and then, whatever material rings like a bell. Let's say they put that into concrete, but it didn't work. But this metal does have a certain ring to it. Okay, well, melt that into magma. Melt the other rock into magma. Combine those, and when it solidifies, see if it rings. Right? Because I'm guessing you could combine the two molten materials. And I don't know if people have ever done that and experimented with that. And you know what another giant red flag is? This just whips out a giant red flag and nobody even cares to look at it, and I think it's really funny. Kailasa Temple and Hindu mythology. Right? Some people are frustrated because they say Kailasa Temple has its answers inscribed onto the walls. They say carved onto the walls is myths about how this place was made, and it says that the place is evidence itself. And people just, it's a myth or it's a legend or whatever. And it's really exhausting, actually. But so it's like, what does he say? He says, the fact that the answer is written on the walls should scream for attention. Yeah. Because he says they're literally carved into the walls that people came there with high technology. And they were able to melt rocks and make this temple. And this temple is proof that actually happened and it wasn't a myth. It's pretty much just what I interpret it as, is they say, hey, this myth happened where people came down with high technology and they were able to melt stones. and they could make temples just like this. And then he says at the end, oh yeah, we're actually very lucky that we have this temple to look at. That's something that people don't even realize. It's like, okay, if we had these Hindu myths, it would be one thing. But we have Kailasa Temple also. We're so lucky that temple didn't get destroyed. It's old. It's so lucky it didn't get lost in time, destroyed, taken, we're so lucky that we found it because it is evidence of high technology. It literally says, oh, carved onto the walls. It says, oh yeah, people were able to just melt stone and make temples just like this. It's just impossibly. And here's an example of this impossible stuff that it could do. And you're just like, do people not realize that we're literally looking at physical evidence of what this says that it can do? And everybody's like, oh, this place is impossible. How did they make this place? We're looking at it, and we can see that it's not possible. How did they do it? And then on the walls it just says, oh yeah, people came down here with this technology and gave it to us, and that's how things like this can exist. Wink wink. And you're just like, how could it have ever been done?
Build such enormous structures, and all without the advanced technology we enjoy today. Then we have precision like Ellora and Ajanta largely ignored. The inside is filled with numerous statues and reliefs, as well as delicate carvings engraved in almost every inch of every corner. The 100-foot tall pillar and the elephants in the arcades carved at the very bottom of the temple, which gave the impression that they're carrying Mount Kailash on their backs, make this place magnificent beyond belief. The most remarkable aspect of the entire saga of research into these man-made cave temples is perhaps the context. They speak about high technology. They are high technology. The whole ancient Indian epics speak about weird interactions with Hindu gods who possess high technology. They are a direct conduit to the ancient past where the Indian epics originate, and we're blessed to have such pristine examples of obvious advanced technology still surviving today. Something mysterious happened here. An advanced method or machinery was certainly going. Archaeologists and historians are completely baffled because it's beyond the impossible whether they accept it or not. Amazingly, few people indulge into the context of the carvings for answers. It's usually a case of ignorance or blame it on ancient astronauts. Yet the very context of the carvings speaks of high ancient advanced technology. We can only imagine what kind of technology utilized. Ancient Indian texts mention quite numerous devices used by gods which could create structures like this without leaving any debris behind. Whether these texts are true accounts of history or not, one amazing fact is very clear. Ellora caves were not created by human beings with simple chisels and hammers. It was conceptually created by a vastly superior technology we have yet to figure out. The fact that the Indian epics that speak of all this are carved on the walls subject matter should scream for attention. The Ajanta caves are well hidden in a horseshoe-styled canyon with a difficult climb to the best ones. Originally, Ellora was elaborately painted and traces remain, though largely decayed over time. The paint in the deepest caves is still vibrant, illustrious, and exquisite, leaving one wondering how it was done. Oil-filled lamps leave soot on the ceilings, and just like the Egyptian tombs in the Valley of the Kings, what did they use for light, given that the caves are so dark? Scholars usually theorize mirrors and candles, but it just doesn't work. It's assumed Ajanta and Ellora are sister monuments, and the same applies there.
And so it's funny because they use the word rock melting technology. And so I think that this is super hilarious because when I was tripping on this bracelet on the thing in India, okay, there was a girl that was like this and she had a bracelet on, but the bracelet was like a free flowing rock like ornament bracelet. And I remember thinking that can't be a carved stone. And I went on a rant about this on this first section about this, but I thought that can't be a carved stone. And then I thought maybe, that had to have been a clay substance that they molded and then hardened. Or it had to have been something that was moldable and then got hardened. That's the only way that that bracelet could exist on that statue like that. And I thought maybe just the bracelet itself was some sort of clay thing. And then I thought, but it is stone, So that's why originally I thought, oh, they're making concrete or they're making something that looks just like rocks. They're making some sort of concrete mixture that just looks a lot like rocks. And then, but I remember thinking, but how did they get an actual rock as the bracelet, though? And that was kind of jarring my mind. Because for a second, I thought I figured it all out. I was like, oh my God, that can't be a carved stone. I literally figured that out. They left something wide open right there. They messed up. I'm smart enough to be able to put together that's a mess up. That can't be a carved stone. That bracelet had to have been something that was put on there and hardened. But how is it actually stone? What is their mixture? How were they able to have a clay-like substance that they could mold, but it's actually stone? And then you hear about the legends of the people coming with rock melting technology. And then this new documentary spills the beans on them using the sun to melt rocks into molten lava to where they can put it in molds or they can form it or they can, So when it turns to molten, it's moldable, and then when it cools down or hardens, it dries. And volcanoes, lava, that's how rocks are made. And so we really can't tell the difference if somebody, artificially melts it and molds it into something and then it hardens. It's kind of a very interesting little life hack, a little interesting. It's like, oh God, okay. So those legends and those myths that are written on the walls of this impossible temple talking about rock melting technology is all of a sudden making so much sense. Because, okay, so yeah, molten rock, and we hear these things, these molten things. Like, in Hindu texts, there's descriptions of these things, and they're talked about in metaphors, but I'm going to break down those metaphors for you so much, it's going to be really weird. And, things are up for interpretation, and especially in religion. Oh, everything, everybody can read the scriptures their own way and find their own meaning, and it's always all up for interpretation. Yeah. Some people believe that gods are real people. Some people see them as metaphors. Some people think those battles they're talking about were symbolic things, and they were metaphors. Okay. I actually think that their battles were metaphors for things. Yeah. But not in the way that you're thinking. Yeah. When they say that sky beings, or when they say that this battle was seen amongst the clouds and all that was heard was thunder, I kind of think about two boats or a bunch of boats blowing each other apart with cannons, because the smoke from the cannon fire, if there's a lot of ships battling, there's a lot of smoke, and all you hear is the cannons, but you don't know what a boat is, and you don't know what cannons are, and you've never made a boat to go on the water, and you don't even know who these people are that are on the water, or if those are even people, or why these people are battling, or what a battle even is. Like, if you're like some caveman, or like some indigenous culture that pretty much doesn't know anything, and you're watching a bunch of boats blow each other to smithereens, and all you see is clouds and thunder. Oh, there's just a bunch of smoke and just a bunch of boom, 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 bow, 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 boom, 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 bow, 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 boom, bow. You just see all these flashes, and all you see is all this smoke, and these people are blowing each other to smithereens. They're fighting amongst the clouds and thunder. I don't know. That's just the beginning. I have not even started yet. I've just, it's crazy how I think this whole thing relates to itself, and it's very, very worth a look at, But yeah, it's just interesting because, okay, if you're just like some tribe of people, and you just have mud houses, and you have hunters, and you have the gatherers, and the wives and the children, and then you have and every night you just make a fire, and you eat a deer leg, and, and then you wake up in the morning and you hunt, and you're just this society of people that doesn't really have anything. You don't even have bowls yet. You don't have forks. You don't have bowls. You don't have anything. You have fire. You have a shelter and a loincloth. And you live your life. And apparently that happened for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. People didn't really adapt. People didn't really get the chance to think outside the box or really do anything. Sure, they made weapons or whatever, but we're pretty much wild animals at some point in our past. And that happens for thousands and thousands of years. And so it's interesting to think that the Hindu texts and the Vedas and the scriptures, they talk about battles of the gods that happen in the sky. And you're like, okay. I start doing my research, and I'm like, what do you mean they're in the sky? Did they say directly that they were in the sky? Or because you always talk in these weird long metaphors in religion, so what did they describe? Are you sure it was in the sky? Because I had this theory that they were on boats. Ships. Some people think that's in the sky. Ships are known to be boats. So let's just run with this thing that, let's say that there's a tribe of people that doesn't know what a boat is. They don't know what anything at all is. They don't even have bowls or maybe even clothes, you know what I mean? And they see a boat on the horizon. And so let's say that you've never even seen the ocean or whatever. Let's say that you live in the bushes, and you've never even seen the horizon line of the water and all that stuff. But you've seen the sky looking up and out through the bushes, okay? You see the sky through the bushes, and let's say you hear some rumbling one day and you decide to follow that sound, and you go for 2 or 3 days just traveling through the woods, and you eventually come to the water, where you see the ocean and the horizon line for the first time ever. And the only thing you can relate it to is, the sky that you look at? Oh, I just came to the edge of the world. Because I've never been where I'm at, but I followed this sound, and I came to here where I see the edge of the world. I see the sky just goes into, and then they see the water for the first time, or the ocean for the first time. And so if they see boats on the horizon line battling, they could think that that's in the sky. if the sky's blue and the water's blue and there's a reflection and they just see these things. So I'm going to be an old, pretty much borderline caveman explaining a ship battle that I see. And remember, the Vedas were passed down by word of mouth stories until eventually, centuries later, they figured out how to chisel it down or wrote it down because they witnessed something so important that they kept track of it through centuries, through word of mouth. Hey, tell your son the blah blah happened. You need to know this. Oh, okay. Hey, tell our son the blah blah happened. They need to know this. And it was passed down word of mouth until one day they came up with language and they're like, hey, blah 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 happened. Remember that everybody's been telling us? We should write this down so that we don't have to remember it. And so they wrote it down the first chance they get. And and so the Vedas, what they're describing in that old story, that ancient story, they're describing sky battles. But remember, this is before they even had writing or anything. So okay, I'm going to be one of those people describing what they describe. And you're going to tell me if it sounds like I'm witnessing a boat battle or not. 2 ships blowing each other apart with cannons. See if what I say sounds like this, because this is what they say in the Hindu scriptures. Oh, they were battling in the unreachable distance. They were battling amongst the clouds and thunder. If there's a bunch of cannonballs going off and there's a bunch of boats, cannons create a lot of smoke, and thunder is loud. So let's say that they were following this loud storm or this thunder that they heard, and that's how they found the ocean or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's one dumb way in my mind that I came up with. So let's say that that's how they ran to the sound or whatever, because they hear this rumbling, and they go out and they finally find it, and all they see is just a bunch of smoke. Because maybe the first time they see the ocean, they just see smoke and flashes, and then eventually, after watching it for however long or whatever, and the smoke clears, they realize that they are beings that are battling. But they're just on these vessels. I don't know what they're on. They're on these big, weird contraptions. They're on these big, mythical things in the sky. And then when the gods come down from the sky, they come to the shore and they come off the boat. They came down from the sky and they taught us all these things. And then they went back in the sky and left. So let's say they get off the boat, they teach you stuff, they get back on their boat and they leave, and you watch them leave? And you watch them go into the horizon line? They just left back into the sky? Because remember, you don't know what a boat is. You don't know what transportation is. You don't know how they're able to even do that. You don't know how they're able to go on the water. All you know is you can't follow them. They left to a mystical land that we can't even get to. That's beyond our capabilities. They left to a place that's like another realm. That where they're so much smarter and better and above us and beyond us that we can't even get to them. That they're unreachable. They're untouchable to us. We can't follow them. They just left in this blue void. They got back on their weird, strange vessels, and they just left back into the void again. And we can't follow them. You know what I mean?